message that will never be received, aimed at the developers for various VR systems. Oculus, Sony, what's the other one? HTC Vive. Those three mostly. I know you're all going to be competitive because that's the way the business world works. And I know that there's a little something called antitrust where you're not really supposed to work together. But just like the dairy farmers had commercials advertising milk as a whole rather than any specific brand of milk, you need to kind of get the brand of VR out there, which, of course, that's a duh moment, and people have been talking about that, and that's, why the various VR creators have sort of said they weren't really being all that competitive, even though they are. But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than just being friendly and like all that. The way that you can get VR out into the public space is to put it in a position for people to use it that don't need to commit to buying it. Okay? We're looking at $1,500 to $1,600 at the bare minimum to get Oculus working. And that is not acceptable for the average consumer audience. But do you know what is acceptable for the average consumer audience? To pay $1 at a movie theater before their movie starts to do something. Now, arcades have kind of died out and they've been replaced by like redemption machines. But forget redemption machines. We can start putting VR setups in the places that used to hold arcades in movie theaters, and we can put things like the VR exercise bike and the VR treadmills, like the Cybereth, whatever one of the things called, Virtuizer, in gyms. We can start getting this stuff out there in forms that people do not have to buy themselves, but they can still use and still get used to the idea of VR until they're going to want it for themselves at some point in the future. The first step should not be consumer adoption. The first step should be consumer introduction. And right now, there's still too many people who haven't tried it. The most that you might say is that a lot of them have seen the funny videos of people wearing it and maybe have been scared into not wanting to use it because they don't want to look stupid. But that's because they haven't gotten a chance to put it on, really. And the only way this is going to happen is if you start in the public space rather than the private space. Get this into the movie theaters. Get this into gyms. Get creative with it, even. I mean, not just the Cybereth Virtuizer and that bike thing. What about other things that have exercise built into it for the gyms? What about getting this installed in, what are they called? Oh, geez. Real estate offices. Century 21. Every Century 21 has what's it called? It has one of these VR setups, and everyone who goes there can do a virtual walkthrough of the house that they want to buy. Actual real walkthrough shot with 360-degree cameras, 3D preferably, of course, not like they're looking at a big bubble, but they can actually see everything in 3D. Or what about the houses that aren't built yet? Architectural firms can have these set up in their offices so that their clients can see what it looks like, or what it's going to look like eventually when their house or building is finished. Stop trying to focus on the gaming crowd. I know that sounds weird to say because I am a gamer and I want to play games in virtual reality. But for me to be able to do that in a way that I have content that's going to keep coming, it has to start somewhere else first. It's not going to work with a $600 pair of goggles and $1,000 computer. So that's it. And for Sony, since you've been hearing this, this doesn't really apply to the PlayStation VR. But what does apply to the PlayStation VR is you need something other than video games. Maybe getting all the things that I talked about isn't going to really happen unless you, kind of strike a deal with Konami to do this in the gyms in Japan. Konami doesn't own gyms in the U.S., but you guys have had, partnerships before. As much as I hate Konami, I still say do this with your PlayStation VR. Get some kind of VR exercise set up in their gyms. But besides that, what's important for the Sony machine to work and stay competitive with the Oculus, even though it's going to, no doubt, it's going to be cheaper. The full setup will be cheaper with the PlayStation than it will with the PC. But that doesn't mean, however, that anything goes. Or that doesn't mean you can just you can just do video games. You need to do something other than games. And VR cinema will be huge someday. It's in its embryonic stage right now, but we will see it someday. Once a whole new language, like there's the language of film, there's the language of television, there's a language of comic books, there's a language of novels, etc., etc. There's going to have to be a whole new kind of narrative language developed for VR, and there'll be a lot of missteps at the start, but it's going to happen eventually. And so it would be good if Sony got in on the ground floor, especially since Sony owns movie studios. Get in on the ground floor and get some VR cinema into, the hands of your users. Give them some incentives other than video games, because no one uses their game consoles just to play video games. So why would they buy a peripheral if it just plays video games when it's going to be $400, $500, $600? Do something else with it. Okay, goodbye.